At the bottom of the world, there's a place where the ocean doesn't just want to kill you, it wants to chew you up, swallow you whole, and then brag about it to the other oceans. Sailors called it Cape Horn, but honestly, they could have just called it nature's shredder. Imagine trying to cross the street while two 18-wheelers are crashing into each other at 100 miles per hour. That's what it's like to try and sail through here. Cape Horn is where the Atlantic and Pacific collide in a tantrum of furious winds, monster waves, and icebergs that casually drift by like white ghosts. For centuries, ships had no choice but to face it, because before the Panama Canal, this was the only way around. But those who braved it often found only madness and death. Today, we're descending into the history of Cape Horn, the deadliest waters on Earth, and two stories that reveal its true nature. One of survival against impossible odds, and another that reads like Lord of the Flies, but with more frostbite and cannibalism. Welcome to the Waxenvein Ledger, where we turn the forgotten pages of history. If you're enjoying the darker parts of history, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support writes the next page in the ledger. First, let's set the stage. Cape Horn sits at the southernmost tip of South America, Chile's Tierra del Fuego archipelago. Lovely on a postcard, lethal in real life. It's right in the path of the furious 50s and screaming 60s, which, no, are not punk rock bands, but the strongest sustained winds on Earth. The winds here are unbroken by land, gaining strength mile after mile until they crash into Cape Horn with hurricane force. Now add the Antarctic circumpolar current, the biggest, baddest ocean current in the world, pushing against you. The result? Colliding swells so chaotic sailors called them Cape Horn rollers. These weren't your average waves. We're talking 50 feet on a normal Tuesday, 80 feet when the ocean's in a mood, and legends of rogue greybeards soaring up to 200 feet. That's basically a mountain of water that can swallow your ship whole. As if that wasn't enough, icebergs drifted silently from Antarctica. Fog rolled in with no warning, and storms turned calm seas into chaos in under an hour. In short, if you sailed Cape Horn, you either came back a legend or didn't come back at all. So what was it like to actually sail here in the 1700s and 1800s? Picture this: freezing rain lashing your face, sails stiff with ice, and rigging so slippery you might as well be climbing a greased death ladder. Crews worked barefoot on decks awash in seawater, clinging to ropes with frostbitten fingers. Food spoiled, sickness spread, and the cold crept into bones until even sleep was no escape. Hypothermia, scurvy, frostbite, Cape Horn offered them all as souvenirs. To round it was considered a rite of passage, but for thousands it was their grave. More than 800 ships splintered in these waters. More than 10,000 sailors never came home. But let's talk about one ship that somehow survived, the Susanna in 1905. A full-rigged ship that attempted the dreaded Horn and ended up trapped in its purgatory for 99 days. That's over 3 months of hell. When she finally limped into port at Caleta Buena, the world was shocked she even existed anymore. Only 8 crew members were still able to stand. The rest were collapsed in their bunks, wrecked by typhoid, scurvy, or literal broken bones. Yet, miraculously, not a single soul died. The voyage of the Susanna became legend, a haunting reminder that even in the Horn's blackest storms, survival was possible. But it was survival at a cost. 99 days of waking horror, each sunrise greeted not with relief, but with exhaustion, pain, and the gnawing certainty that tomorrow might be worse. The Susanna lived, but she came out of the Horn as something else entirely, more ghost ship than proud vessel. But if the Susanna's story was miraculous, our next one is the stuff of nightmares. Enter the HMS Wager, a shipwreck that makes Cape Horn feel less like an ocean and more like a doorway straight to the abyss. In 1741, during the War of Jenkins' Ear, the British ship HMS Wager tried to round Cape Horn. What met her was not a storm, but a siege. The sky collapsed into black, the wind screamed like 1,000 kettle drums, and the sea rose in walls that blotted out the horizon. Each wave crashed over the deck with the weight of a cathedral, sweeping men off their feet and choking lungs with salt. The masts groaned like dying giants, sails split into ragged banners, and the timbers themselves shuddered as though the ship were trying to tear free from its own fate. For hours, the crew fought against an ocean that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. The Wager was no longer a vessel, it was a coffin waiting to close, hurled toward the rocks of Chile not by accident, but as if the sea had chosen her. The wreck was brutal, but what came next was worse. What followed was less shipwreck survival and more humanity unravels. Stranded in brutal conditions, the crew descended into chaos. Supplies ran out, disease set in, and frostbite gnawed at them. Mutiny broke out, factions split, men murdered each other, and whispers of cannibalism stalked the survivors. Some tried to rebuild order, others just lost their minds entirely. It was Lord of the Flies, but instead of schoolboys with conch shells, it was frostbitten sailors gnawing on scraps and plotting murder. Eventually, a few survivors staggered their way back to civilization, but the story that returned with them was pure horror at sea. The wreck of the Wager showed that Cape Horn shattered more than ships. It was a requiem for the men themselves, broken long before the sea released them. So what do these stories tell us? Cape Horn was not just geography. It was an executioner, a gauntlet that tested ships, men, and sanity. Before the Panama Canal opened in 1914, it was a passage that commerce demanded, but it exacted its toll in blood and wreckage. The Horn's legacy is written in shattered timbers and drowned lives. The Susanna, barely alive after 99 days of torment. The Wager, its survivors scattered, some dead, others ruined. Together, they tell us that nature does not care for human ambition. It will grant miracles sparingly and horrors freely. Even today, sailors and adventurers still round Cape Horn, for glory, for tradition, or simply to tempt fate. But its legacy is written in nightmares. More than 800 ships have splintered here, their names swallowed by the sea, their crews vanishing into spray and silence. And those are only the ones we know. Cape Horn is not a legend because of two stories. It is a legend because it has collected thousands. Together, they remind us of one truth: nature does not negotiate. Cape Horn was, and still is, the sea's Gothic cathedral, beautiful, terrifying, and merciless. And the sailors who faced it either became legends or its ghosts. If you felt the chill of these waters, subscribe to the Waxenvein Ledger, where history walks hand in hand with horror. Next time, we'll open another page of the ledger, another story where the past refuses to rest. Until then, beware the Horn and the sea that still keeps its dead.